Welcome to Cashflow Podcasting, where business owners reveal how their podcasts have supercharged their success. My podcast completely transformed my training business, so I've seen firsthand the magic that podcasts can work. And here's the best part. You don't need millions of downloads to boost your business's revenue and impact. Let our guests show you how. Well, that wraps up our first season of Cashflow Podcasting. So many big lessons learned. Want to provide a little bit of a recap and a review here as we conclude the season, which can serve as a handy bit of an index for which episode you might want to catch or to review. So to review, we started first with Andrew Youderian. His company, E-Commerce Fuel, is a community that supports owners of e-commerce businesses. And Andrew stressed that podcasting is pretty unique in a way that it can truly build trust and foster community better than just about any other medium out there. You are literally inside the listener's ears, part of their daily lives as they're doing what they're doing. They're cooking, they're cleaning, they're commuting, and you're part of their life, their journey with them. In Andrew's case, he saw that 25%, just about a quarter of his customers were coming through his podcast. And that when it comes to launching a podcast, you don't need to have a massive audience, but just a real passion for the topic, something that you can genuinely, with enthusiasm, discuss week after week and have fun with it. And to be human with it, be yourself, bring your goofy, weird, whatever flavor of personality you have, be human with your voice. And in so doing, you resonate all the more deeply with other real humans who want to engage in a business relationship with you. And they think, that Andrew guy, I like the way he works it. I would enjoy conversing with him. I would enjoy working with him or being a part of a community that he's a part of. Because I'm just liking the vibes here. In our second episode, we talked to Caleb Brown, and his firm is New Planner Recruiting, which helps those in the financial planning industry recruit their new financial planners. So in the headhunting space, he was thinking about starting a podcast, but he thought, wow, there's kind of a lot of financial planning-ish podcasts out there. Let's carve out a niche by focusing on the new financial planner. Didn't see any content there, and so he became the trusted voice in that zone. And in so doing, he built tremendous goodwill amongst his prospective clients who are familiar with his podcast and his name. They spread it around and has resulted in not only building his pipeline of potential candidates that he can then place in these firms, but also his pipeline of clients who like him, they know him, they trust him because of what he's bringing out there. And he's been getting the business. And what's great about having a high ticket offer, such as, recruiting services, one placement is a substantial dollar value. A single customer can pay for your whole year of podcast production, which is what Caleb is seeing. He's seeing 1++ customers coming through, thus paying for the entirety of his podcast production expenses. Next up, we had Casey Garrett talking about microdosing for healing. She reported that about 50% of her clients come from her podcast, which really makes sense. In a topic like microdosing, boy, there's some high trust that's required. Casey brings that trust, and that brings forth the clients. She also found some good results by appearing on other podcasts, and then the listeners there decided, let's listen to Casey's own podcast, and they got a warmer and warmer and warmer relationship. And she said that when folks are listening to the podcast, they're getting the idea that you're really an expert in this. You have tremendous knowledge, but it doesn't feel like a sales pitch. It's fun, interesting content, but along the way, we're getting some fantastic long-term engagement and nurturing. Next up, we heard about podcasting for maximum business results with some of my folks who are in my personal podcast mastermind group. And this was a hard-hitting one at 8 minutes of rapid-fire insight and results. Scott Anthony Barlow of Happen to Your Career, Chris DeFerrio of Keys to the Shop, which is a coffee shop and hospitality support business, and Kwame Christian of the American Negotiation Institute. Some cool takeaways here. Scott's podcast over the years has generated nearly $4 million of revenue for the business, and Chris's podcast brought in over 75% of his clients. And some themes they talked about here is when folks are hearing from you over and over and over again, it really establishes that trust, that authority, that expertise over time, such that even some high profile clients like Target for Chris get the message that, okay, this guy is really legitimate. He's safe. We can feel comfortable, bring him in on a broad scale with a big organization. Kwame mentioned that podcasting is the foundation of his whole business and that everything good that has happened to the American Negotiation Institute has happened because of the podcast. In a world like negotiation, people want to know, are you good at this stuff? Do you know this stuff? And as they hear episode after episode after episode, they get that memo. And some folks come back 7 years later and say, been loving the podcast. And now is finally the opportunity we can bring you in for some speaking or some consulting. And so again, that long-term engagement really coming together. On the flip side, we had Brian Carney talking about farmland stocks, sharing that there is, in fact, some immediate short-term benefits that can be gleaned from launching the podcast. And namely, that even before you have a big podcast, a big following, a long-standing established thing going, people are willing to appear on your podcast and have a conversation with you about their area. Brian mentioned that in his early days of the podcast, one of his very first episodes, he was able to land as a guest one of the top names in all of agriculture. And that person wouldn't have sat down for a 30, 45-minute chat with him if it was just him for fun, but rather in the context of a legitimate show. I can see some cover art. I see you've got some episodes. This becomes a real thing. People are willing to engage in that conversation, opening up the doors to those relationships, which can be valuable for the business in and of themselves. The guests, and not necessarily just the listeners, are the valued relationship, which might become an investor, a referral partner, or a customer themselves. Very handy. Next up, we had Anne, the queen of cash flow podcasting, our CEO. And we talked a little about who are the ideal businesses where podcasting really makes sense. And some of those takeaways being that they have generally a high ticket offer so that you don't need to have large audiences to make it financially worthwhile. They have some level of differentiation, not a pure commodity like pork bellies or like an agricultural thing that might be traded on the commodities market. And there's a level of trust there. So if relationships and trust matter, a podcast might be a great choice for the business. If it's very strictly about being a commodity at the lowest price, or there's a strict governmental contracting type situation going on, podcast is probably less likely to really deliver the maximum impact that it could. And again, we said when high ticket offers are in existence, you don't need a massive audience, just a few people and maybe even one customer a year, as we heard in the case of Caleb with that recruiting business, can do the trick to make it a viable financial investment. And podcasting, another cool benefit is that it can provide market research in terms of what are people really interested in? What are they vibing with? What episodes are having high downloads and view counts? What episodes are having high retention engagement numbers, listening through the full episode? That can be pretty telling right there. And we also talked about consistency. If the goal is long-term audience building, then yes, you're going to want to have that consistency. However, often it is. Every week, every 2 weeks, every month. However, short seasons can also be super effective to give people a taste of what might it be like to work with you. I can see that without necessarily having to get dozens and dozens of episodes with tremendous consistency. So again, thinking strategically about the goals of the podcast will inform everything from how frequently and consistently do the episodes need to be made, to who are we going after, how are we differentiated, what's the art and the music, and of course, we'd love to help with all of those things in a podcast launch. Behind the scenes, we are preparing for an even better season 2. You'll hear from Ashley at Boutique Hub, who's getting 10 customers per week. That's right. 10 customers, not per year, not per month, per week, directly from her podcast, and so much more. But if you're already fired up to get started on your podcasting journey today, we recommend you schedule a free strategy call at cashflowpodcasting.com/chat. We'll discuss your vision and create a roadmap to success. Looking forward to connecting with you. Hope to catch you next season, and peace.
Thanks for joining me today. If you're ready to start your podcasting journey to grow your thought leadership and boost your revenue, schedule a call with us at cashflowpodcasting.com/chat. Don't wait to take your business to the next level. I'm Pete Mockaitis, and until next time.